difference between leaders and followers isn't intelligence, education, or even opportunity. It's knowing when to keep your mouth shut. Followers feel compelled to comment on everything, defend every decision, and prove their worth through constant chatter. Leaders speak only when their words can create value, influence outcomes, or solve problems, while everyone else is competing for airtime. True leaders are controlling the conversation through strategic silence. They understand that the person asking the questions has more power than the person providing the answers. They know that revealing less makes people assume you know more. They've learned that in a world full of noise, silence is the ultimate attention getter. The most powerful person in any room isn't the one talking the most. It's the one everyone turns to when they finally stop talking. Your mouth can make you a leader or mark you as a follower, but it can't do both. Your mouth can make you or break you. I want to tell you about Marcus, a brilliant young executive who had everything going for him. Sharp mind, excellent education, natural charisma. He was sitting across from 3 potential investors who were ready to write him a check for $1 million. The deal was practically done. All he had to do was answer their questions and sign the papers. But Marcus had one fatal flaw. He couldn't stop talking. What should have been a 30-minute meeting turned into 3 hours of Marcus explaining every detail, every backup plan, every possibility. He talked about his childhood dreams, his college experiences, his philosophy of business. The investors kept trying to steer the conversation back to the deal. But Marcus kept going. He thought he was impressing them with his knowledge and passion. By the end of that meeting, the investors had changed their minds. Not because the business plan was bad, but because they realized Marcus didn't know when to be quiet. If he couldn't control his mouth in a simple meeting, how could they trust him to lead a company? That $1 million opportunity walked out the door because Marcus never learned the power of silence. Your mouth is not just a body part. It's either your greatest asset or your most dangerous weapon. Every word that comes out of it has the power to build bridges or burn them down. Every sentence can open doors or slam them shut forever. Most people don't understand this. They think talking is free. But I'm here to tell you that words are the most expensive currency you'll ever spend. You see, there's a difference between having something to say and having to say something. Marcus had to say something about everything. He felt uncomfortable with silence, so he filled every gap with words. But successful people understand that silence is not empty space. It's fertile ground where wisdom grows. When you zip your mouth at the right moment, you give yourself time to think. You give others space to reveal themselves. You create an atmosphere where real communication can happen. But when you let your mouth run wild, you lose control of the conversation. And more importantly, you lose control of the outcome. I've watched people destroy 20-year friendships with one careless sentence. I've seen marriages crumble because someone couldn't hold their tongue during an argument. I've witnessed careers end because an employee said the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time. Your mouth doesn't just express your thoughts, it shapes your destiny. The problem is that most people have never been taught the art of strategic silence. We live in a world that rewards noise. Social media has convinced us that we need to have an opinion about everything and share it immediately. We think that speaking up always shows strength. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay quiet. Think about the most respected person you know. I guarantee you they're not the loudest person in the room. They don't feel the need to comment on every topic or correct every error they hear. They speak when their words add value, not just because they have vocal cords. There's a proverb that says, even a fool is considered wise when he keeps his mouth shut. That's because silence has a way of making people assume you know more than you're saying. When you're always talking, people can measure your intelligence by your words. But when you're selective with your speech, they have to guess at your wisdom. And they usually guess high. Marcus learned this lesson the hard way after losing that $1 million deal. He spent the next year observing successful people. He noticed that they asked more questions than they answered. They listened more than they spoke. They were comfortable with pauses in conversation. They didn't feel the need to fill every moment with their voice. When Marcus finally got another shot at investor funding, he did something different. He prepared 3 key points he wanted to make. And that's all he said. When the investors asked questions, he gave direct, concise answers. When they stopped talking, he didn't jump in to fill the silence. He let them think. That second meeting lasted 45 minutes. Marcus spoke for maybe 10 of those minutes total. And you know what happened? He got the funding. Not just the amount he asked for, but more than he originally requested. The investors were impressed by his self-control and clarity. Your mouth is like a faucet. It should have an on and off switch that you control. Most people have broken faucets that just keep running. They leak words everywhere, creating floods of confusion and mess. But when you learn to control the flow, you can direct your words exactly where they need to go for maximum impact. The power of silence isn't about being antisocial or unfriendly. It's about being intentional with your communication. It's about understanding that every word carries weight. And if you're going to spend that currency, you better make sure you're getting a good return on your investment. When you zip your mouth strategically, you're not hiding your thoughts. You're protecting your power. You're saving your words for moments when they can create the most value. You're building a reputation as someone whose words matter because they're rare and well chosen. The mouth that never stops talking loses its authority. But the mouth that speaks with purpose commands attention and respect. That's the difference between noise and influence, between chatter and communication, between speaking and being heard. But let me tell you what happens when you don't control your mouth. Let me tell you about Rebecca. A woman who had everything going for her until she opened her mouth one too many times. Rebecca was the regional manager for a major corporation. Smart, hardworking, respected by her team. She had been with the company for 8 years and was in line for a promotion to vice president. Her future looked bright until one afternoon when she stepped into an elevator with Janet, another manager from a different department, and it was just the two of them in that elevator, going up 12 floors. Janet mentioned that she had heard rumors about budget cuts coming. Instead of staying professional, Rebecca saw an opportunity to share what she knew. She started talking about the CEO's personal financial problems, about the argument she had overheard between 2 board members, about her suspicions that the company was hiding debt. Rebecca thought she was just having a casual conversation with a colleague. But Janet wasn't just any colleague. She was married to one of the board members. Every word Rebecca spoke in that elevator was being mentally recorded and would be repeated that very evening at Janet's dinner table within 48 hours. Rebecca was called into the CEO's office, not for her promotion, but for her termination. 8 years of excellent work destroyed by 8 minutes of loose lips. Here's what Rebecca didn't understand. Words have wings. Once they leave your mouth, you cannot control where they fly or where they land. That conversation in the elevator didn't stay in the elevator. It traveled to a dinner table, then to a boardroom, then to a legal department. Rebecca's words created ripples that became waves that eventually crashed back on her own career. Your words don't just affect you, they affect everyone they touch. When you speak carelessly about others, you're not just sharing information. You're planting seeds of doubt, suspicion, and distrust. These seeds grow in ways you never intended and create consequences you never imagined. So Rebecca's problem wasn't that she was a bad person. Her problem was that she had never learned the discipline of keeping certain thoughts to herself. She confused having information with having the right to share it. She thought because she knew something, she had permission to say it. But wisdom understands that knowledge and the right to speak are two different things. Just because you know your neighbor's business doesn't mean you should discuss it. Just because you witness something doesn't mean you should broadcast it. Just because you have an opinion doesn't mean everyone needs to hear it. Every time you open your mouth to speak about someone else's private matters, you're making a withdrawal from your reputation account. People might enjoy hearing the gossip in the moment, but they also make a mental note that you cannot be trusted with sensitive information. They realize that if you talk about others to them, you'll probably talk about them to others. Rebecca discovered this the hard way. After word got out about why she was fired, her professional network started avoiding her. Former colleagues stopped returning her calls. Other companies were hesitant to hire her because they had heard she couldn't keep confidential information confidential. Her loose lips didn't just cost her one job, they damaged her entire career trajectory. The tongue is small, but it can start big fires. One careless comment can destroy relationships that took years to build. One moment of poor judgment in your speech can create consequences that last for decades. Rebecca learned that words are like bullets. Once you fire them, you cannot take them back. And the damage they cause can be permanent. What makes this even more tragic is that Rebecca's conversation in that elevator served no purpose. It didn't solve any problems, didn't help anyone, didn't accomplish anything positive. She destroyed her career for absolutely nothing. She gave up her future for the temporary satisfaction of sharing gossip. This is the cost of undisciplined speech. When you cannot control your mouth ends up controlling your life. When you let words flow freely without wisdom, those same words will eventually flow back to drown you. But here's what I want you to understand. Rebecca's story doesn't have to be your story. You can learn from her mistakes without making them yourself. You can choose to zip your mouth when wisdom says to stay quiet. You can build a reputation as someone who can be trusted with sensitive information because you know how to keep it sensitive. The difference between success and failure often comes down to knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Rebecca spoke when she should have stayed quiet, and it cost her everything. Now let me tell you about Thomas, a man who understood the power of keeping his mouth shut. Thomas worked as a janitor in a Fortune 500 company. Every night he cleaned the offices while the executives went home to their families. People barely noticed him as he emptied trash cans and mopped floors. But Thomas was always listening. He heard the conversations that happened after official meetings ended. He witnessed the phone calls executives made when they thought no one was around. He saw the documents left on desks and overheard the private discussions in hallways. Thomas knew more about that company than most of the board members. The difference between Thomas and Rebecca: Thomas never said a word for 15 years. Thomas went about his work quietly. Executives grew comfortable around him because they knew he wasn't a threat. He became invisible in the best possible way. People forgot he was there and spoke freely around him. They trusted him with their secrets without even realizing they were sharing them. One day, the company faced a crisis. A hostile takeover was being planned, and someone was leaking information to the competitors. The CEO was desperate to find out who the spy was. Meeting after meeting was held, but they couldn't identify the source of the leak. Finally, someone suggested they asked Thomas, not because they suspected him, but because they realized he was everywhere and saw everything. When they approached Thomas, he didn't just tell them who the spy was, he told them exactly how the scheme was working, what information was being passed, and when the next meeting was scheduled. Thomas had known about the spy for months, but he had kept quiet because no one had asked him directly. His silence had earned him such trust that when he finally spoke, his words carried tremendous weight. The spy was caught, the takeover was prevented, and the company was saved. The CEO was so impressed with Thomas's loyalty and wisdom that he offered him a position in the security department. Thomas accepted and eventually became the head of corporate intelligence. The quiet janitor became one of the most trusted advisors in the company. All because he understood the discipline of strategic silence. Strategic silence isn't about being weak or passive. It's about being smart with your information. Thomas understood that information is power, but only when it's used at the right time and in the right way. He didn't waste his knowledge on gossip or small talk. He saved it for when it really mattered. When you practice strategic silence, you build a reputation as someone who can be trusted. People start sharing more with you because they know you won't repeat it carelessly. You become a safe space for others to express their thoughts and concerns. This trust becomes your greatest asset. The executives at Thomas's company felt comfortable talking around him because they knew he wouldn't judge them or expose them. His silence created an environment where people could be authentic. And in that authenticity, Thomas gained insights that chatty people never receive. Most people think they need to speak to be heard. But Thomas proved that sometimes you're heard most clearly when you say nothing at all. His 15 years of disciplined silence spoke louder than any words could have. When he finally chose to speak, people listened with complete attention because they knew his words were rare and valuable. This is what happens when you master the discipline of strategic silence. You don't become invisible. You become indispensable. You don't lose your voice. You make your voice more powerful. You don't miss opportunities. You create better ones. Thomas transformed his entire life by understanding one simple principle. The person who listens more than they speak often knows more than the person who speaks more than they listen. But how do you actually change the way you communicate? Let me tell you about Maria, a high school teacher who was struggling with classroom management. Her students were disrespectful, chaotic, and completely out of control. Maria's response was to talk more, explain more, and repeat herself constantly. The more she spoke, the less her students listened. Maria was exhausted from trying to talk over 30 teenagers every day. She would go home with a sore throat and a heavy heart, wondering if she was making any difference at all. Then one day, something changed her entire approach. During a particularly rowdy class, Maria decided to stop talking completely. She stood at the front of the room in complete silence. At first, the students didn't notice. They kept chatting, laughing, and causing disruption. But gradually, one by one, they began to realize their teacher wasn't speaking. The room slowly fell silent. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward Maria, waiting to see what she would do. She stood there for a full minute without saying a word. Then, in a quiet voice, she said just one sentence. When you're ready to learn, I'm ready to teach. That moment changed everything. Maria had discovered that her silence was more powerful than all her words combined. She had learned to make her students come to her instead of chasing after their attention with constant chatter. From that day forward, Maria implemented what she called the less is more principle. Instead of giving long explanations, she gave short, clear instructions. Instead of repeating herself 5 times, she said things once and waited. Instead of talking over disruptions, she used silence to regain control. The transformation was remarkable. Her students started paying closer attention because they knew she wouldn't repeat herself. They began respecting her more because her words became precious and meaningful. The classroom became a place of learning instead of chaos. All because Maria learned to zip her mouth strategically. But Maria didn't stop there. She took this principle home and applied it to her family relationships. Instead of nagging her teenage son about his responsibilities, she stated her expectations once and then let natural consequences do the teaching. Instead of arguing with her husband about household chores, she had one calm conversation and then trusted him to follow through. The change in her family dynamics was as dramatic as the change in her classroom. People started taking Maria more seriously because she had stopped wasting her words on repetition and frustration. She had learned that when you say less, people hear more. Maria's secret was learning to pause before speaking. She gave herself 3 seconds to ask, is what I'm about to say necessary? Is it helpful? Is this the right time? If the answer to any of those questions was no, she kept her mouth closed. She also learned the power of strategic questions instead of statements. Instead of telling her students what they did wrong, she asked them to evaluate their own behavior. Instead of lecturing about consequences, she asked them to predict what might happen. This approach made people think instead of just react. The most important lesson Maria learned was that silence isn't empty space that needs to be filled with words. Silence is a tool that can be used to create emphasis, build anticipation, and command respect. When you're comfortable with silence, you give others permission to think, reflect, and respond thoughtfully instead of reactively. Maria's transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened because she committed to changing one conversation at a time. She proved that you can retrain your mouth, just like you can retrain any other habit. Now let me tell you the most powerful story of all. A story about a man named David Chen, the CEO of a technology company that was facing the fight of its life. 3 years of hard work, 200 employees, and millions of dollars in investment were about to disappear because a larger corporation was attempting a hostile takeover. David had built his company from nothing. He started in his garage with 2 partners and a revolutionary idea for software that could change how hospitals managed patient data. They struggled for months without pay, lived on instant noodles, and worked 18-hour days. But their persistence paid off. The software worked, hospitals began adopting it, and the company grew rapidly. Success, however, brought unwanted attention. Megacorp, a massive technology conglomerate, decided they wanted David's software and his client base. When David refused their buyout offer, they decided to take the company by force through a hostile takeover. The attack began subtly. Megacorp started spreading rumors about David's company in trade publications. They questioned the software's security, suggested financial instability, and hinted at management problems. Their goal was to drive down the stock price and make the takeover cheap. David's first instinct was to fight back publicly. His marketing team prepared press releases defending the company. His lawyers drafted responses to every accusation. His board members wanted him to go on the offensive, to speak at conferences, give interviews, and tell their side of the story. But David made a decision that shocked everyone. He chose silence. While Megacorp's executives were giving interviews and making public statements, David said nothing. While they were spreading rumors and making accusations, David remained quiet. His board thought he was making a terrible mistake. His employees were confused by his lack of response. Even his own family questioned his strategy. "Why aren't you defending yourself?" his wife asked him one evening. "Why are you letting them say these things without responding?" David looked at her and said something that would prove to be prophetic. Sometimes the best response is no response. Let them talk. I'm going to let their own words expose who they really are. For 6 weeks, the attack continued. Megacorp's CEO appeared on financial news shows, spoke at industry conferences, and granted interviews to major publications. He painted David's company as unstable, unreliable, and doomed to fail. The media coverage was brutal. Stock prices dropped. Some clients began expressing concerns, but David noticed something that others missed. Every time Megacorp CEO spoke, he revealed a little more about their true intentions. In one interview, he mentioned specific internal processes at David's company that he shouldn't have known about. In another, he referenced private conversations that had supposedly taken place in David's boardroom. In a third interview, he accidentally revealed details about client contracts that were supposed to be confidential. David was collecting every word, documenting every claim, and building a case. While Megacorp was busy talking, David was busy listening and learning. His silence was giving them enough rope to hang themselves. The breakthrough came during a live television interview. Megacorp's CEO, feeling confident after weeks of unopposed public attacks, got careless. When the interviewer asked him about his company's expansion strategy, he bragged about how they had inside information about David's company's weaknesses. He mentioned specific financial details that only someone with access to confidential documents could know. David was watching that interview from his office. The moment he heard those words, he smiled for the first time in weeks. Megacorp's CEO had just confessed to corporate espionage on live television. Within hours, David's lawyers filed a lawsuit alleging theft of trade secrets, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence was overwhelming because Megacorp's own executives had provided it through their public statements. What they thought was a strength, their detailed knowledge of David's company, became proof of their illegal activities. The tables turned overnight. The same media outlets that had been covering Megacorp's accusations were now reporting on their legal troubles. The same financial analysts who had questioned David's company were now questioning Megacorp's ethics. The hostile takeover attempt collapsed as Megacorp's leadership became focused on defending themselves from criminal charges. But the story doesn't end there. The publicity from the legal battle actually helped David's company. Clients who had been concerned about stability were impressed by David's dignified handling of the crisis. New customers reached out, wanting to work with a company that had integrity. Investors who had been watching from the sidelines decided to provide additional funding. 6 months later, David's company was stronger than it had ever been. The attempted takeover had failed, Megacorp was facing federal investigation, and David had emerged as a respected leader in his industry. All because he understood the power of strategic silence. When the crisis was over, David's board asked him how he had known that staying quiet was the right strategy. His answer reveals the wisdom that every successful person must learn. I realize that when your enemies are destroying themselves, the worst thing you can do is interrupt them. My silence gave them the space to reveal their true character. If I had fought back with words, it would have become a debate about who is telling the truth. But by staying quiet, I let their actions speak for themselves. David's story teaches us the ultimate lesson about zipping your mouth. Sometimes your silence is not passive, it's strategic. Sometimes saying nothing is the most powerful thing you can say. Sometimes the best way to win an argument is to not have one. This is what it means to live the zip life. It means understanding that your words are precious currency that should never be spent carelessly. It means recognizing that silence can be a weapon more powerful than any speech. It means having the discipline to let others reveal themselves while you remain in control. Starting today, I challenge you to practice the art of strategic silence for the next 7 days before you speak in any important conversation. Ask yourself 3 questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If you can't answer yes to all 3, zip your mouth. Watch what happens when you stop filling every silence with words. Notice how people start listening more carefully when you speak less frequently. Observe how your relationships change when you become known as someone who thinks before they talk. Your mouth has the power to create your future or destroy it. The choice is yours. But remember, the most successful people in the world are not the ones who talk the most. They are the ones who know when to zip their mouth and let their wisdom speak through their silence. The power is in your hands. More importantly, it's in your choice to keep your mouth closed when wisdom says to stay quiet.